Today, obviously, is the anniversary of the very first auction for the 2008 IPL.
That's right, Kitch. The first time in sporting history that such amount of talents and individuals went under the hammer in a sporting event as an auction. We've never seen that before, and MS Dhoni, of course, I think at the age of 26, one of the most expensive players to go under the hammer, and Chennai Super Kings were lucky enough to get that player, and ever since, 15 years later, he's still remembered as Tala in Chennai.
Yeah, it was a great result, and I can remember from an Australian perspective, the Australian side, they were in the middle of I think there was a match, and Andrew Simons went for a record amount. Well, to speak more about this, we are joined on the line right now by Charu Sharma, the commentator and the compere. He was the CEO of the Royal Challengers Bangalore for the cricket side for the 2008 Indian Premier League, and he joins us. So, Charu, thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Pleasure. I'm glad that we can connect again. And yeah, you talk about the first ever auction 15 years ago. Wow, what a moment and what memories attached to all of that.
Where were you watching the very first auction?
Well, I was in charge of the Bangalore team, so there was only one place I could have been, which was on the table inside the auction hall, along with the team owner and the rest of our think tank, including Rahul Dravid.
And how much research had you done leading up to certain players and budgeting for players and working out how much other sides were going to pay for players? How much time had you devoted to that leading into the auction?
What a great deal, because I was, amongst other things, an auctioneer even then, so I knew how wide an auction could be. And what we did do is just to give others a sense of how uncontrollable situations could get, is to actually have a couple of mock auctions inside our office, with mock owners and what have you, only to have people realize that things, are not really in your hand, because just when you think it is, or players in your hand, somebody else comes up who's been cheating all along, trying to come up with a bid. So it's really quite wild, and we prepared as much as we possibly could. I dare suggest better than a few others, or most others. But, once again, it's an auction, and ultimately you have to take the call right there, right then, and it's what you feel. Should we go a little more? Should we step back? And like every other team, we got a few on our wish list, and we didn't get a few on our wish list.
Yeah, at the time, it's hard to remember, because I remember that there was the ICL, which was around at the time, alongside the IPL. Goes to show you how things have changed in 15 years. At the time, did you predict, or was it widely reported that MS Dhoni, thought he was going to be the highest paid player leading into the auction?
I'm not so sure that was the common thought, because there are many other players, and of course, like everybody else, and as has been proved over time, Dhoni, of course, is a very special player, talisman really, but the focus was on all-rounders, especially fast-bowling all-rounders, because, it's a rare breed, and they could not only give you 4 express overs, 4 great overs, maybe pick up a couple of wickets and come and slog a few down the road towards the end, which could change the match. So all-rounders were definitely on everyone's horizon. And before you ask, we bid for, and successfully bid for, the world's best all-rounder at the time, Jeff Callis.
You were part of the Royal Challengers Bangalore team when the auctions happened, of course, and a very curious pick at that time seemed Virat Kohli at the age of 19 years old. Was there any thought, or was there any foresight into thinking this man would be one of the legends of the game now?
Well, we all knew that he was, pretty special as a batsman. But remember, he was the captain of the Indian under-19 team. And this is actually a very long story, and I'm not so sure we have the time for it. But very quickly, each team was also as a mandate, needed to have 2 under-19 players for, quote-unquote, developmental purposes.
Right.
And obviously our attention was on the Indian under-19 team, which at that point in time was in Kuala Lumpur, playing the under-19 World Cup. And I think they were about in the quarters at that point in time when all of a sudden everybody started making a beeline for Kuala Lumpur, or at least for the under-19 players. And remember, it was a team of 15, to be able to quickly pick your 2. Not that these under-19 players were likely to be stars or would even get a game, because there were so many other global stars. But you had to pick 2. So you thought, well, you might as well pick the best 2. And we too had our sights on Kohli, who was, of course, the captain at that point of time, and a couple of others. In fact, we were very interested in Manish Pandey, because he, as you know, is from Bangalore.
Yeah.
And so this early process of trying to get some kind of a contractual situation with these under-19 players in Kuala Lumpur started out. And that soon escalated into a bit of a war, because all sorts of agents landed up in Kuala Lumpur, and these under-19 players, including Manish, who I was in touch with, said that, what do we do now? Because I've said yes to you, but there are agents all over the place that are promising us all sorts of things if we sign for one team or the other, which wasn't the right thing for the Indian under-19 team at that point of time, because they really needed to focus on the under-19 World Cup. So I, along with a couple of others, made a little petition to the board suggesting that we should not be picking up these under-19 players in this maverick fashion. And in fact, what we should be doing is to make sure that they're spread evenly in all 8 teams, add one under-19 player to the 15 who are in Kuala Lumpur, make 16, and have a good old-fashioned draft, to which the board thankfully agreed. So all these early negotiations with all the under-19 players were immediately put to a stop, and they, of course, went on to win the cup. Good for them. And Kohli became pretty hot property in terms of a junior. And only later was there a draft for the under-19 players, much later, after the auction, where I suppose all eyes were on Kohli, so were ours, but it was through a draft. So the first team name to be picked up for the first choice of the draft was Delhi, the Delhi Daredevils at one time. And, we all thought, when Kohli's from Delhi, so gone. And the next thing we know, Delhi Daredevils picked up the young lefty fast bowler, who was the Indian under-19 bowler at that point of time. And we were all like, wow, really? I mean, they haven't picked up Kohli. And, as luck would have it, the second name to be picked out in terms of a draft pick was Bangalore. So with about a millisecond hesitation, if at all, our owner put up his hand and said, Virat Kohli, thank you very much. And that's how he came to Bangalore.
That's fantastic. And being from Bangalore, so I remember the likes of other, of course, bowlers from Karnataka. Vinay Kumar was one of them. Rahul Dravid, Anil Kumble. Like, we followed them. We read a lot about them as well on the papers. And there's always this question of, right, it's the first ever IPL and you want to create an identity with the state, the people, the language and the country as well. These options, how did they come about?
Well, I mean, everybody's just basically focused on getting the tournament on at that point of time. You mentioned the IPL era some time back, and that, in fact, had kind of been strangled at that point of time to make sure it didn't ever have another season, and which is why the IPL came up in a very, if I may say so, unholy hurry, because they wanted to make sure that the IPL would not go with another season. They had 2 seasons prior to the IPL. And if all the players naturally came to the IPL, then there would be no IPL. So that's how the IPL was strangled. And the IPL was born as the official league, in contrast to the IPL, which was, quote-unquote, at that one time, the unofficial or rebel league. And everything was done compressed to 10 times the speed it should have been done. And everybody was just scrambling. I mean, we just said, let's get the ground ready, let's get whatever we need for our team, let's get our team members here, because they're coming from all parts of the world. And it's understandable that some of the team members were, I'm not saying apprehensive of whether anything's going to happen or not or what, but they were just not paying as much attention to the IPL as they could or should have been, which was now the whole world's attention on it. So it was quite a struggle to just get the players organized and have them on flights and come here and get our clothes done and get the ground booked and, all the 50,000 things that need to get done.
Right.
So that really was the focus of that point of time in season 1.
When we look back at the IPL, it's hard to imagine it'd be where it is today, where the franchise cricket league has got its own franchises with the IPL clubs that have started in South Africa, also here in the UAE. Can you foresee a time when the BCCI may release certain Indian players to be able to play in franchises of IPL clubs in other competitions around the world?
Wouldn't that be fantastic? But I think the Indian board is only too aware that the premium nature of the IPL is because Indian players are not available anywhere else. And also, of course, commercially, it's a very, very successful league. I don't think in the near future there would be a time when Indian players will officially be allowed by the cricket board to play in these other leagues, because that would then make all the rest of the leagues just as, if I can use the term, powerful as the IPL, because all players are then available. Of course, you still have to find the money to fund the players, but this exclusivity is likely to remain and therefore will be the big USP of the IPL, where, except for Pakistan, that's just the way things are, all players are technically available.
I get that. I just thought that there may have been a release on certain, 18, 19-year-old squad players that are certainly around, not the high-end test players. But I get what you're saying. The unique selling point of the IPL is the exclusivity on those Indian players, and I think that, you can't have, at risk of diminishing the product if you've already seen your favourite player play for your favourite club, well, albeit a franchise of your favourite club, that then does belittle what makes the IPL so good.
Well, true. You mentioned some of the younger players. I think, if anything, in the future, the board may relent and allow some of the completely retired players, if they're still needed, to participate in these other leagues. Certainly not the youngsters, because they will remain in contention for places in the Indian team itself. And in India, and I still think in the rest of the cricket-playing nations largely, players are still very keen and enthusiastic to be a part of the country's setup, not just of the club. Because franchise cricket has not reached a point where other sports have, where it's clearly club over country. I think in cricket, people are still very concerned about country. And it's only once they've completely given up the possibility of playing for the country and or have reached a stage where they've had enough of playing for the country, are they focusing on franchise cricket. So certainly not the youngsters, but maybe it could be a time in the future where some of the older players who are definitely not in contention to playing for the country could be allowed, if they so wish, to seek their fortunes in other leagues.
Sir, I remember reading this news article in 2008, just when the auctions were happening. A lot of journalists really didn't know how to describe this moment, but one of the writers from the Indian Express, and this thought, it still, it comes back to me every time I think of the auctions. They said that if the Hilton Towers in Mumbai, where I believe the auction was happening, they equated that location to the Louvre Museum in Paris. They said if the Hilton Towers is the Museum of Louvre, then MSD was undoubtedly the Mona Lisa. Looking back at that, what do you say about that, sir?
Well, he certainly turned out to be Mona Lisa, didn't he? Because he does have that lovely little enigmatic smile as well on his face. Actually, it's a very sunny smile. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was certainly a moment in international cricket which will be remembered forever, because it was the creation of something, as you mentioned, akin to the Louvre, where it really had all the precious commodities of the world at one place. And it has gone on, I suppose, to prove itself without any limitation at all. At that point of time, I think it was difficult to imagine where the IPL would go, because everything, as I said, was put together in such a slapdash fashion, or in just very quick fashion. But the product has survived, it has thrived, it's caught the imagination of just about everybody, and I think it was also, sometimes it's destiny, because T20 suddenly came into vogue at that point of time. And a 2020 league was just exactly what the game needed to fire the imagination of the new generation of cricket fans, which is why it worked really well and continues to work well. Had it been, say, a longer format league, I think the younger generation would have said bye-bye, not interested.
No, I think that we are certainly grateful for the growth in the game in many, many areas, particularly in the women's game as a result of the T20. And there's one thing that we haven't been able to touch on today, that is the Women's Premier League. But Charu Sharma, as the CEO of the Royal Challengers Bangalore for that inaugural IPL back in 2008, we do appreciate you being generous with your time. Thank you for joining us on Talk 100.3.
You're most welcome. And by the way, you mentioned the WPL.
Yeah.
Once again, the biggest thing for women's cricket, certainly as far as India is concerned, because it will fire the imagination and the aspiration of hundreds and thousands of young Indian girls. So it's just, once again, it came a little late, but it's not too late.
No,
it's ideal.
No, I think so. I think so, because even looking at the ratings of the World Cup that's currently on in a lot of markets around the world, I think that we're finally seeing the tipping point of television broadcasters and sponsors are suddenly saying there's actually money to be made here. There's a real market for women's sport, and I think that's the real tipping point now what we're experiencing.
Yeah, I will have to add the word patience to all those who are expecting good commercial values for the WPL, but it will happen.
It will happen.
Way, just for the record to end, and for the record to end, I'm a big fan of women's cricket. So
yeah.
There.
Charu Sharma, thank you very much for joining us. So on the anniversary of the very first IPL some 15 years ago, can you believe that? We are speaking to the former CEO and the one-time auctioneer, Charu Sharma. You're on TSB, Talk Sport Business.